In this clip, we're going to learn the power of prefabs. So prefabs are game objects that are prefabricated with components and possibly even scripts applied to them. And they can be reused over and over again in a scene. So looking at a prefab, technically we've already gone through the process of setting up these game objects, and we want to create them in a prefab that we can quickly create over and over again just by dragging and dropping them into the scene from the project window. So the first object that we created was this barrel, and we've added the rigid body component and the capsule collider component to it. And what I would like to do is actually make this into a prefab that we can use over and over again in our scenes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the rotation on this to X, Y, and Z of 0. And then I'm going to take this object and I'm going to drag it down into my prefabs folder. It's important to know that the prefabs folder itself is not the magic of creating prefabs. You can drag and drop any object from the hierarchy panel into your project window, and that will automatically create a prefab. So let's go ahead and left click and drag this barrel and drop it into our prefabs folder. And again, this is just for organization. Once we do that, this object is now a prefab. I can left click and drag this into the scene, and it has all of those components already placed in the game object itself. Let's go ahead and delete that. I'm going to take this object and I'm going to set the Z value to 90 here, and there we go. So now let's say that we want to make some changes to these assets. Looking at all of these barrels here, these barrels are not associated to the prefab that we created. So how do we know that? Well, looking at this object, we can see that it has this prefab tag here, and we have some functionality that we can use. Let's go ahead and select the next one. Notice that this says model. This is not associated to the prefab that we created. So in order for that to become a prefab, we would actually have to remove these from the scene and then utilize the prefabs. So what I could do is actually take this prefab, hit Control C, Control V, and paste it into the scene, and now you'll see that it has the prefab functionality. So I'm going to hit Control C, Control V. I'm going to drop that down and add a little bit. And then let's select these. Control C, Control V. And we'll do something like this. Perfect. We take these two and just move them back a little bit. Now you might be asking, why did we need to make all of those into prefabs? Well, let me show you one way that prefabs are very helpful. Let's say that we change something about this one barrel, like perhaps we change the mass. Let's say that our mass is just too high for these barrels themselves. What I want to do is I want to knock them back down to a 1 value. Now when I change the 1, it will not change the other in the scene unless I select the object that we've changed and I hit the apply button. When I hit the apply button, it is going to change that mass to 1 on all of these game objects. Now, this is very helpful whenever we have lots of objects in the scene. There might be an instance where we're trying some things out and we're trying to adjust these values, and perhaps we said, all right, 1 just isn't enough for these barrels. Let's go ahead and try 1,000, and I hit enter, and then I hit apply, and that goes to, well, actually I've already I've already messed up the revert. So let's take this a step back. Let's say that we want to change the value of this, and we're just testing things out, and I hit 1 on this one, and I hit play, and I look at this and I decide that's just not giving me the result that I'm looking for here. And I've got these over the tops of those colliders. And it's just not giving me the result that I want. And so what I would like to do is instead of making that barrel a mass of 1, let's take it back to the mass of 1000, or the state that is in the project window. To do that, you would just simply hit revert, and you'll see that it reverts back to the state of the object in the project window. Now, anytime that you make a change to the object and you hit apply, that changes all of the objects in the scene, and it also changes the object in the project window. So if I were to take this barrel and look at it from the source, you'll see that the mass is set to 1. So that is prefabs and how you can control them. Now let's take a look at how we create other prefabs and look at other uses of them. So let's say that this barrel trap that we have here, we want this to be used across the game. We don't want to keep making this thing. And so I decided that I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to place it in the center of this trap. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this object that is in the center, so fence 4, and I'm going to actually copy the transform information that's here. So I can select the cog and hit copy component. And then I'm going to select my empty game object that I just created, and I'm going to paste that component as new, or paste the component values. And what that does is it pastes those values in, and this just ensures that my pivot point for the game object is centered in the rest of these game objects. So I'm going to set the Y value to 0, just so that way it's down at the base of this. And then I'm going to zero out the rotations on this, just to make sure everything's clean. And then let's take all of the barrel objects and the wood fence objects, and let's left click and drag those on top of the game object. So what we've done is we've parented all of those assets into this game object. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this to barrel trap. Once that has been parented and everything is part of this game object, I can now left click and drag this into my prefabs folder, and then I've created a prefab. So now I can left click and drag these traps in, and I can press play, and I would see them all working as they should. And so now I don't have to keep setting all of these traps up. I can just drag and drop them in and get right back to creating my levels and creating that gameplay. Now there's one more use that prefabs have, and that's during instantiation. Let's say, for example, that we have created some sort of weapon that shoots barrels or something like that. The weapon itself, we wouldn't be able to see the barrel loaded into the cannon or something like that. But whenever the player interacts with this cannon, it will instantiate or create a barrel from the project window, and it will spawn it at a point and shoot it out like a cannon. That is instantiating the barrel or the cannonball, whatever you want to use. It's instantiating it and then pushing it out using physics. And so instantiation is really, really important. Now, those instantiated objects can also be destroyed in gameplay. So let's say that we shoot out a cannonball. We don't want that cannonball to live even though it's been shot 30 minutes ago. We want it to be gone and out of memory. You can take those objects out of memory, out of the scene, you could destroy them, and you can always respawn them because they're a prefab. So prefabs have a lot of power, and I would suggest looking into them even more as you progress in your game development career. So now that we've talked about prefabs in length, let's move on to our next clip.